The Torah portion this week is 19 and 20 of Leviticus. We spoke a little bit about 18 last time, and there's a very consistent theme in all of these passages, and they have to do with the holiness or the separateness of God's people. And this is one of the most difficult topics that we struggle with because we're in the world, but we're not of it. And how do you achieve this equilibrium, this balance? This is Leviticus 19, verse 2. Speak to all the congregation of the sons of Israel and say to them, you shall be holy, for I, Yahweh, your God, am holy. So he says, you're to be holy as I'm holy. And what's the simple definition of holy? It's to be separate, distinct, not mixed. Every one of you shall reverence his mother and his father, and you shall keep my Sabbaths. I am Yahweh your God. Do not turn to idols or make for yourselves molten gods. I am Yahweh your God. And then he gives a whole, Leviticus 19 is a list of commandments. Everybody knows love your neighbor as yourself. That's Leviticus 19. And there's just 40 or, well, it seems like 40 or 50, 20 or 30 of them. Then you get to Leviticus 20, and he keeps reiterating this, but in Leviticus 20 he starts off in the first 5 verses talking about Moloch. And he says, anybody that sacrifices his children to Moloch has to be killed. And it says you're not allowed to disregard people when they do this. If somebody offers their children to Moloch, you can't ignore it. You have a duty to identify this person and destroy them. And then it goes on in the next part to talk about mediums and spiritists. And it calls, what does God call when we seek? A couple of things. When we make sacrifices to different entities, or when we seek input, when we seek direction, guidance. I think we all are, I think they were. You know, there are Christians, and I've sadly noticed this lack very strongly among Mormons, who don't understand that astrology is totally forbidden by the Bible. Why? It's seeking guidance from something other than God. Mediums and spiritists are the same things. You're not allowed to seek advice from them. Moloch is forbidden for 2 reasons. You're offering your sacrifice to something other than God, and God abhors the sacrifice of people. This is something that we need to watch out for, because even as Christians, have you ever noticed that Christians, godly Jews, Messianics, whatever you want to call them, are very capable of sacrificing their families in the service of God? It's not allowed. It's not allowed. Scripture does not allow you to do that. You're allowed to give what you have. Like David says, I will not offer to the Lord that which costs me nothing. You can give what you have. The part of you that belongs to your wife or your husband, you can't sacrifice that. That belongs to them. This is something I learned the hard way. Still learning it. God is not pleased when we offer people. We can't do it. And of course, this is one of the reasons that as you look through this chapter, you get very uncomfortable with what abortion has become in the world, and that is a convenient way to have birth control. And it becomes, here's this human life, but it didn't come at a good time for me, so I'm going to extinguish it. I think you can make a very cogent argument that this is the worship of Moloch. And at least it's something I'd be very careful with. So it mentions the worship of Moloch, mediums and spiritists, and something that keeps coming out in here that I think is interesting is the honoring of father and mother. The Lord keeps saying, if you don't honor your father and mother, let's see how he puts it here. It says, if there's anyone who curses his father or his mother, this is Leviticus 20, verse 9, he shall be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother, his blood guiltiness is upon him. And then the next part of the chapter is about the same thing that Leviticus 18 was about. Improper sexual relationships, adultery, fornication, all these things. And what God says, if you go down to verse 22, I'm summarizing this because I want to get us thinking about some things. One of the most powerful forces present among human beings is peer pressure. The need to conform to what people are doing is just, it is unbelievable. And God's coming along here and saying, don't do that. He says, you conform to my pressure, don't conform to theirs. How many of you know that Israel struggled with this their entire existence? They'd see what the nations were doing around them, and it was just hard to keep doing what God asked them to do. So verse 22 of chapter 20. You are therefore to keep all my statutes, all my ordinances, and do them, so that the land to which I am bringing you to live will not spew you out. What happened to the people of Israel in the land? It spewed them out. They weren't there. In fact, one of the biggest evidences we have of restoration is that God has put Judah back in the land. The land spit them out, just like the Lord told Moses. Moreover, you shall not follow the customs of the nation which I will drive out before you, for they did all these things, and I have abhorred them. Hence I have said to you, you are to possess their land, and I myself will give it to you to possess it, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am Yahweh your God, who has separated you from the peoples. You are therefore to make a distinction between the clean animal and the unclean. Just think about it. What's one of the hardest things for us as a group to do? Is to be among people and they say, here, have bacon. And you say, no. God says don't. Oh, he did not. Jesus did away with that. The law is done away with. That they not only do you start feeling like you need to join them, they can't stand the fact that you're not doing what they're doing.
You know what, John? Tana Baker, when I was at this dinner, anyway, there was pizza, and I went to take some. Oh, is that going away party for the bonds? And she goes, oh, Cecilia, you don't want that one, then it's pepperoni.
Oh yeah, your friends will do that. And you know, by and large now in the valley, oh, Tana she'd work on you pretty hard.
John got her convinced the other way around. She told me one time that she had a sandwich for him, had pork, and you wouldn't eat it. So she, from then on, made sure she got beef.
Well, I try to be nice about it, but you think about it. If it was Ron who told me, or that Ron or Annert who told me not to do it, I might not. But who told me not to? And that's the problem I have, is that we'll examine this a little, but the need to be like other people is just enormous. And if we can't silence that voice, we'll end up following the nations. That's just what we do. And listen, not eating pork is one of the simple ones. I wish that was the hard one. But it is interesting how much it bothers people. And so notice, here's God telling us to be holy as he is holy. One of the first things he says, make a distinction between the clean animal and the unclean animal. Between the unclean bird and the clean. And you shall not make yourselves detestable by animal or by bird or by anything that creeps on the ground, which I have separated for you as unclean. Thus you are to be holy to me, for I, Yahweh, am holy, and I have set you apart from the peoples to be mine. That is not instinctive and it's not natural. And here's the thing, as we talk about this, how do you manage to be in the world and not of it? How do you manage to be kind, gentle, loving, but not compromised? And I think, Teresa, you brought up a great example. How did the Nazis insert themselves into the Lutheran Church? I'll tell you one of the ways they did it is because they said, this is good for Germany. Let's exalt the German people. The Germans, listen, what happened to Germany after World War I was inexcusable in my mind. Germany had done stupid things, but have you ever seen somebody take somebody and rub their face in it? We did this to Germany, and we kept doing it. And they just got madder and madder. And then Hitler came along and said, long live the Aryan race, long live German supremacy, let's get back the empire. And he got his foot in the door in the way of holiness, so to speak. And, there's awful stories. We probably don't need to go there. But Christians who shut their ears to the cries of Jews because they were conforming. And that's what we're going to look at a little bit here. There's a verse in Exodus 23 that I don't have it memorized, but it's close. And I'm finding out memorizing Scripture is really a good thing. I'm also finding out that my mind doesn't hang on to things. And I've tried to memorize the Sermon on the Mount, and I've been memorizing it in the NIV, and I'll come back to it, and I keep slipping into the King James, which messes me up. Have you ever noticed if you've memorized something and you forget a word, you're done. It's like you're playing your piano piece, and you're right in the middle, you know it. I don't know what key I'm in, I don't know. It's just that same feeling. But Exodus 23:2. I think the NIV might say you shall not follow the crowd in doing wrong. The New American Standard says you shall not follow the masses in doing evil, nor shall you testify in a dispute. And I know for me it's been very helpful to discover that holiness is about being separate. It's about being distinct. And I've mentioned to you many times, because it's a good picture to me, your body is holy. And for your body to live, you need a perimeter, a boundary. And that's your skin. And what happens if you violate that boundary? If it's bad enough, you could die or you could get an infection. It has to be intact. And then you have places you take things into your body. Things you see, things you hear, things you eat. You have ways to eliminate. But your body is holy. It's separate. The only time your body becomes like the rest of nature is when it's dead. Then it disintegrates and it goes back to the earth. And we forget that Scripture constantly tells us that we're the body of the Messiah. That we're the parts. And so we're separate. And it's so important to be able to figure out, how do we keep that separateness? How do we keep our integrity, but be good and loving? I mentioned this, and then I think Kai had his hand up. I know for me growing up, and it's even true today, I want to be part of the crowd. I want to be cool. Everybody get what I'm talking about? Who likes to stick out? We don't like it. It's not fun. I mean, there's nothing worse. Can you imagine? I bet you'd walk right out. Say they called a big party at a restaurant. And so you went down there to be with all your friends, and you walk in the door, and you're wearing your jeans and t-shirt, and everybody there is in tuxedos. Would you sit down and eat with them? You'd go home. You didn't fit. You'd be so uncomfortable you couldn't stand yourself. I mean, I'm sure you've all had the experience of going someplace and being way overdressed or way underdressed. And it's so uncomfortable. We need to conform. It is a part of our nature. Now, Kaya didn't want to go too far, Pi.
Well, you look at this chapter 20, and for me, I look and it says, if you do this, I'll set my face against you, I'll cut you off. If you do this, I'll put you to death, I'll put you to death, I'll put you to death.
It's real upbeat. I'm feeling better.
Seriously, look at the last of every verse in that chapter. And I think a lot of the world, when they think of Christianity or God, that's all they hear. Mm-hmm. They hear this God says, do this my way, or I'm going to set my face against you, I'm going to hate you, abhor you, I'm going to put you to death, and say, blood's on your head, and cut you off. And so when I look at something like this, and I appreciate what you're saying as far as what it means to be set apart, how did Jesus live this? Last night I was reading, because Yeshua is the exact representation of the Father.
Yeah. Yeah, you're obviously reading the NIV. There's a big controversy over the use of the word indignant there.
Is there?
The King James, I mean, it made perfect sense to me because it's like, if I'm willing, that's the sense I got.
And so I have to go back and look at the Greek, but what came to me last night in that was this, because it goes on, and it's the story of the man who stretches out his hand in front of the people, and the people are all waiting to see if Jesus is going to break the Sabbath by healing somebody.
Yeah.
He's just, it says he's angry and frustrated at it.
That time he's definitely incensed.
Yeah, there's just
That they want to see him heal the person, so they, not because they're
condemn him for breaking
right, not because they're going to be joyful that the man is healed, but they're going to be, this will be a feather, an arrow in their quill to shoot Yeshua with.
Telling Yeshua, and this whole thing with the Molech and God saying all these nations, they were, they didn't distinguish between what was holy and profane, and they brought it into the land, and the land itself, I had to vomit them out. He's saying, I'm setting you apart as a people. Why? To be the people, like Yeshua said to the man, I'm willing, be clean. And then he had to go show himself to the priest and all that, but what I heard in his heart was, not only am I willing, it's like, I'm tired of seeing what sin does when it comes into the people that I've called to be holy and free. And I guess when I read this, it's so easy for me to fall into only seeing, I'm going to cut you off, I'm going to cut you off, I'm going to put you to death, I'm going to put you to death. And it feels overwhelming. I think a lot of times, the Christians, whatever, when they hear don't eat pork, that's what they hear you saying, God is saying do this, or you're not worthy, you're this. Yeah. And I think somewhere in it you've got to see the promise in God's heart and his love, because otherwise it overwhelms you. It's a desire to be brought into life.
Yeah, and I think hopefully we'll get to this a little later in the discussion, but you're absolutely right. It is interesting that we'll have chapters like this that emphasize spewing you out, judgment, and then we'll have him showing himself to Moses and saying, Yahweh, Yahweh, the compassionate, the gracious, the forgiving. And there's a tension, Dean.
Anytime we talk about the things we should do, sometimes we talk about it in the context of judging what another person doesn't do. And if you go on in that Exodus 23, where you were reading in verse 4, it says, if you come across your enemy's ox or donkey wandering off, be sure to return it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay?
Yep.
If you see the donkey as someone who hates you, fallen down under its load, do not leave it there. Be sure you help them with it. And when we talk about any sins, if you're going to be set apart, if you're set apart for the reason between you and God, it's hard for a person to be your enemy.
There's a psalm. Is it a psalm that says, when a man's ways please the Lord, even his enemies are at peace with him?
Yeah. But if we don't, if we do the things that God's asking us to do based on what somebody else isn't doing, then we always have controversy.
No, and I think that's a great point. It's just like what Cecilia was sharing about Tan and some of them. I've found, I'm sure all of you have, that once people know that I'm not going to condemn them, I don't do it, this is the reason, they get to where they watch out. Any place I go now in the valley, they watch out for me.
But if you went in and
but I'm not,
pizzas and dumped them in the garbage, they might not have such respect for you.
Exactly, and I think, it's kind of bringing out what Kaya said, and I just want to mention some things here about conformity. We had a uniform, and I came to see there were some real negative aspects to the uniform, but there were positive things. But one of the problems with uniformity, is thinking that uniformity is unity. And boy, I discovered that wasn't true. In fact, one of the things I discovered is that God is a God of infinite variety. But there's nothing wrong with uniformity. Here's what I also discovered. When we wore the uniform, there are people that wouldn't associate with us. I had people in my own family that wouldn't do anything with my kids because they didn't want to be seen with somebody in something different. And I came to see one of the things we can do is teach people that conformity is not necessarily godliness. And it's helped me is because along the way you meet a lot of different looking people that do different things. If you cannot accept that person just the way they are, you have a problem. Not them, you do. And I remember, Jamie came out, and Jamie didn't know how to keep things to himself. So we had some very transparent discussions, let's put it that way. I mean, he was curious. At that time, none of the women wore any makeup. And there were a lot of different things, and he was just curious about it. And what I thought was so interesting, it didn't bother him at all that we didn't. He just loved us the way he was. I remember looking at him and thinking, you know what? There's something about Jamie I want to be like. I like this. I went different places with him. He just liked people the way they were. When he came here and saw us wearing jumpers, he didn't have this great... there's another fellow that came here from Australia or something. He walked into the community and saw the jumpers and started screaming about legalism. He wasn't here an hour. And he left. He never got to know one person because we were different. And I think part of understanding this lesson is that the need to conform is of the flesh. The need to make people all the same so you're comfortable. It's not necessarily from God. In fact, God tells Israel, to be distinct. But I looked at some psychological experiments that a psychologist named Ash did, and I thought this was really cruel. And I mentioned it to you before, but I was curious what he actually did. And this was right in the early 50s. I would have been about that tall when he did this, probably 2. But he would take a group of 9 men, students in college, and one of them would be the test subject, but they didn't know that. The other 8 were his confederates. And he would put up a picture of 3 lengths of line, and then he'd have one he'd show. It was easy to just tell is which one of those up there is the same as this one. And what he would do is his confederates would be coached to answer the right answer for like the first 3 questions. And of course, the person that didn't know, one person is there, they're not aware this is an experiment, and they are the experiment. The other 8 are doing what the psychologist tells. So the first 3 times, everybody's answering it right. And then suddenly, the confederates all answer it wrong. What he found is over a third of the time, people would answer the question wrong, knowing it was wrong, but they could not stand to be different than the group. He'd show a short line, and the 8 would say, that's the same as the long line. And he even found when he checked into it, that some people felt like reality was what the group thought, not what reality was. That just blew me away. But then I started to understand, if you ever watched people and teenagers, and see, have you ever been tormented by what happened to Southern society when they went from having slaves to believing that slavery was a positive good for society and preaching sermons on it? You want to read some horrific sermons, read these. I mean, talk about twisting the message of the Bible. You think, oh, they're all wicked, evil people. No, they weren't. But they were just like these kids in the room that knew the right answer, but no one else was answering the right answer, so they're going to answer the wrong answer. Do you think this happens to teenagers today? And here's the next question that I was asking myself. All right, what gives kids strength to oppose, and not just kids, but older? And you know what was interesting is I thought, they were checking latchkey kids. And they thought, well, this is going to be, because latchkey kids that go home and there's no parents, they tend to be the ones by far the most at risk for alcohol, drugs, profligate sex, all the things that, sadly, if you start a kid early enough on that, their life is over before it starts. And that's why the psychologists, they're not looking at this from any religious point of view. Just how do we keep these people from being cast-offs in society? What I thought was interesting is it wasn't so much that there was a parent at home. What made the difference was the amount of activity the parents did with the kids. And if kids spent significant time with adults, especially parents, those kids were infinitely stronger to withstand temptation, because when someone wanted them to do something they shouldn't do, who was the most important person to please? Parents. If you allow the peer group to become the most important group to please, what are you going to do? This becomes very important to us who love God. If Yeshua, if God is the one I'm trying to please, does peer pressure have any impact on me? It has none. Which shows that we still have a lot of issues on the one we're pleasing. I have so much stuff here, I don't want to... I get reading on these things and I really get... It's interesting, they talk about identity shift. You know, a child will have their identity that they pick up from their parents, but this will become in dissonance or in discord with their friends. And at some point, some kids choose to go along with the kids, and then they have dissonance. In other words, I'm doing this, but I know I shouldn't. And finally what happens is they reject the input of their parents or their teachers, whatever, and totally join this subset, and they do away with the dissonance. And of course, all these are sociological terms, and they bore me too, but it is interesting to me when you watch us in religion, this can happen, that we can find ourselves serving God because our group is. And the problem is, remember when Yeshua told the story about the man who built his house on the sand and the one who built his house on the rock? You notice what he mentioned about the storm? I'm sure you've all noticed this in the story. He doesn't say if the storm came. He says when. There is no life that is not going... Would you agree with me? We're going to have storms in our life. It's going to happen. To think it won't happen is sublime ignorance. And so, how do people weather the storm? And of course, Yeshua's point was, if you hear what I say and do it, your house will be on the rock. You'll be able to get through. If you heard what I said and you don't do it, you'll have a nice house, but it'll be on the sand and it will crash. Now, I'm going to put something out here for you to bother you. Because right now in our society, we have powerful, huge societal pressure for us to change what we consider acceptable sexual relationship. Have you figured this out? It is so strong, and like Kaya was saying, a lot of times the world's going to reject us because all they hear from us is hatred, condemnation. There's a fellow named John Dellon. Anybody heard of him? He lives in Logan. He has a podcast for Mormon doubters and dissenters. And he spent the last 6 months chronicling his critiques of the LDS Church and waiting to hear if these might cost him his membership. Now that's the idea of stupidity to me. On Monday, he moved a step closer to knowing. His LDS leaders in North Logan summoned the host of Mormon Stories to a January 25th, so that'd be a week from tomorrow, right? Today's the 17th. He's been summoned to this hearing to answer allegations of apostasy. I have been informed that the likely outcome of the disciplinary council will either be disfellowshipment, did I say that right? Disfellowshipment, yes, which is official censure, or excommunication, he said in a news release. Then he went on to say his LDS stake president, Brian King, who oversees a number of Mormon congregations in Cache Valley, outlined the reasons for the charges. They included the podcast, which explores difficult historical and cultural issues within the religion, his public support for same-sex marriage, and the ordained women movement. Are you familiar with the ordained women movement? There's a huge movement within the Mormon Church that says women should be allowed to be a part of the priesthood. And Kelly, the lady who was really the president and the championing of this, has been excommunicated. Okay, his publicly expressed doubts regarding key elements of Orthodox LDS history and theology, and his criticism of the Utah-based faith's approach to gays, feminists, and intellectuals. So I'm just bringing this up. There's this fellow named John Dellon. He's in trouble with the LDS hierarchy, and yet in some way he wants to stay part of this group while he wants the freedom to criticize it. This is one of the interesting pictures of the need for conformity. He wants them to change to be like him, but he also wants them to allow him to stay a part of them. When asked to comment on the impending hearing, LDS Church spokesman Eric Hawkins said, "We respect the privacy of individuals and don't publicly discuss the reasons why a member faces church discipline. Those reasons are provided to a member by their local church leaders." Hawkins added it was his understanding that the reasons for the charge had been clearly spelled out in letters to John Dellon. In the interest of honesty and transparency, Hawkins said, he may choose to make those letters public. He did, in fact, release 3 of King's letters, and this is what he's told he has to do. Publicly renounce and apologize for the false concepts you have widely expressed regarding God, Jesus Christ, the atonement, the restoration of the gospel, and the Book of Mormon. Cease providing a public forum for any person who is critical of church doctrine. Stop promoting groups or organizations that espouse doctrines contrary to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Resign your status as an ordained minister of another faith. Well, apparently he had signed up to be a minister with the Universal Life Church, but he resigned that. I bring this up because he is saying that it's his job to criticize the Mormon Church because they are not changing their stand on things the way he sees they should be. And of course, the Tribune has written an editorial completely in support of John Dellon. Another story. You know who Kelvin Cochran is, or Cochran? He just fired for the Atlanta fire chief. Kelvin Cochran is a decorated firefighter. He is also a devout Christian. He's a deacon at a Baptist church and he teaches Sunday school. By all accounts, he's a decent and honorable man, and now he is unemployed. He served 7 years as the chief of the Atlanta Fire Department, and he lost his job over a book he wrote about biblical morality titled, "Who Told You That You Were Naked?" A small portion of the book contained what critics called homophobic language. Atlanta Mayor Kasim Reed suspended him last month and then fired him on January 6th, the day he was supposed to return to work. A good man, a husband and father and grandfather, was fired from his job because his boss objected to his religious beliefs. That ought not to happen in the United States. Are you getting the drift how different these two things are? And yet, we're at a place in our society, we can't resolve this because we're going to try to resolve it on what seems right to us. I profoundly disagree with and am deeply disturbed by the sentiments expressed in the paperback regarding the LGBT community, the mayor wrote, Mayor Reed. He wrote last November on his official Facebook, "I will not tolerate discrimination of any kind within my administration." Here's the interesting thing. Did he discriminate against anybody? He wrote a book. A lot of stuff here for you to be thinking about. But do you realize there's a possibility you could be prosecuted for what you think? Because, I'm not going to read this whole thing, they did an investigation. There's no evidence anywhere that he ever treated, hired, fired people based on their sexual orientation. Everyone agrees he's been a wonderful boss, considerate, and fair. But he's fired because of what he thinks. And of course, this is, I'm amazed you haven't heard about this because Franklin Graham's in the middle of it, and it's a big to-do. And then the New York Times, which is my favorite conservative paper, There was no levity intended. The New York Times editorial board said it doesn't matter if Chief Cochran, I'm not sure, was innocent. That's not the point, they wrote Tuesday in a scathing editorial titled, God Gaze in the Atlanta Fire Department. It should not matter that the investigation found no evidence that Mr. Cochran had mistreated gays or lesbians, the Times wrote. His position as a high-level public servant makes his remarks especially problematic and requires that he be held to a different standard.
And yet those are the same people that are going to say the president's personal life shouldn't have any reflection on whether we vote for them or not.
Yeah,
The fire chief has to talk a certain standard, and yet other people don't have to live one.
Yeah, and I brought this up because I wanted you to think about the fact that we're called to be holy and to be separate, and yet we are called to be in the world. I think one of the most difficult things facing the church right now is the whole gay marriage, GLBT, the whole thing, because we have a history of getting it wrong, don't we? We have a history in the church of just tearing these people up and just stupid stuff. I mean, we'll let an adulterer walk in there, and we all know. And yet, we keep this one part of the sexually disobedient community. I mean, we have some really bad history. How do we handle this? And this becomes very, very important because the temptation to handle it is to just go along. I mean, it's like Calvin Cochran, whatever his name. And see, listen to what he says. The LGBT members of our community have a right to be able to express their views and convictions about sexuality and deserve to be respected for their position without hate or discrimination. But Christians also have a right to express our belief regarding our faith and be respected for our position without hate and without discrimination. In the United States, no one should be vilified, hated, or discriminated against for expressing their beliefs. He's fired. Lois.
It's part of the irony, we talk about Islamic terrorism, they just had a thing that, I think in Afghanistan or something, some of these militants took two gay men and on top of the building and pushed them off and killed them for the rape. And yet, you hear the outcry. It's just, society's so funny. I mean, you have this outcry against discrimination and how you deal with stuff, and then protect the Islamic faith, and this, I don't know, it's just all mixed up, isn't it?
It is, and it reminds you of some things. James says, love not the world. Is that James or is that John? Love not the world, neither the things that are world. That's John, isn't it? If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. I think James is the one who says a man who's a friend with the world is an enemy of God. I grew up with those things in my head, but I also have this one in my head. For God so loved the world. And I mean, I think, see, here's something I think is very important, because our kids growing up, Tina's age and younger, they're going to grow up in an environment we didn't envision. If we don't teach them how to follow Yeshua and to love Him, and be good news, I guess is the word I would use, this is going to be a powder keg. To teach people to hate is not the gospel. And what's more, to say this sin is worse than that one because I don't have this one, I've got that one. That's the other thing I've noticed. Oh, I can't believe you would do that. Well, I have no temptation to do it, so obviously that's terrible. But this one, we can kind of forgive that because I slip up over here all the time. Dean, you had your hand up?
It's a tough one for me because as I was growing up, you had a lot of evangelism that you got involved in, and it was very much, looking back on it, the evangelism, but it was very much a coercion,
Oh, yeah.
of what.
It was almost twisting your arm behind your back to say uncle, wasn't it?
Right, and I've come to see I don't even like that anymore. it just bothers me. But then, in where you started in Leviticus, if you read on in there, it says, if you don't speak up, and if you don't say something,
Yep.
then you need to be put to death. So, you know, I'm not sure of what the balance is all the time, and you have to go by the Spirit, because I react to, it doesn't matter whether you're Islam or Hindu or Christian or anybody else. I react to somebody coming and saying, if you aren't this, then you're damned. If you don't see it my way, then you can't.
Yeah,
And I
that's-
don't care who it is. And so, I hear things like what you read about the firemen and stuff, and you go, how unjust can that be? And then I look at things in my own life and say, well, I don't know that I've had that problem, so am I conforming, or do I look at things in a different way? Am I not saying something? You know, I mean, so I don't,
Yeah, it's,
you don't know where sometimes take it. Because I've got a lot of friends and people who, their lifestyle and the way they grew up, and listen, I mean, I don't even know how they can think any different. I mean, I had an employee that worked for me, and she kept having to go to her grandpa's funeral. And I said, and one time she went to 3 of them, and I said, is he coming back to life? Or, I mean, I asked her, is he coming back to life? I mean, how many grandpas can somebody have? Well, her mom had been married so many times, and I mean, she had gay brothers and sisters that were over here, and she had all this stuff, and she had no idea what was right or wrong. She had no clue. She loved them all, and she went to all her grandma's and grandpa's funerals. And so I looked at it, and it was so foreign to me to even think of anything like that, but yet to see her mind so confused as to anything of right or wrong. She had no concept.
well, and I think that's
I just
the
don't know where to go with it.
that's the challenge I think we have, because I've been thinking about the same thing, because I thought it was interesting that here John Dellen's being persecuted because he's so pro the gay agenda. Kelvin Cochran's lost his job because he's anti. What's the balance? And again, looking at the Sermon on the Mount, there's a statement, Yeshua, he goes through the Beatitudes and tells us all the things, you know, blessed are you this, and they're wonderful, the whole sermon, each one of those. But he gets to the end of the Beatitude, and you remember what he does? He looks at his disciples and he says, you're the salt of the earth. But then he makes this statement, which is an odd statement. And this is the NIV. But if the salt has lost its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? And I've never heard of salt losing its saltiness. If salt loses its saltiness, it's not salt, right? And so Yeshua is saying to his disciples, if you lose your ability to season, your ability to, you know, salt purifies, it preserves, it does. And Yeshua goes on to say, it's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled on by men. Well, he's not talking about things. He's talking about people. And then he goes on, then what's his next statement? You are the light of the world. A city on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do men light a lamp and put it under a bowl, but they put it on a stand, and it gives light to the whole house. In the same way, let your light so shine so that men will see your good deeds and praise your Father in heaven. When I look at those, it makes me think we do have an obligation to speak up. We do have an obligation to stand, but I love what it says about Yeshua, and I don't remember where this is in Isaiah. Kai, you might remember. Somebody might. It's a messianic prophecy, but it has this beautiful statement. And it says, a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. A bruised reed he won't break. Because you think about it, a lot of people today, like this lady you're talking about, she is a smoldering wick and a bruised reed. And there are people that would come in there with a sickle and just cut her in pieces. But no, it says Yeshua, he'll come. And I don't know about you, it really puts me back with what the writing says. I don't think I can do this without the Holy Spirit, but I think I can. with the Holy Spirit. I think I can love and yet be true. I believe it's really important to teach ourselves and our kids to stand for righteousness, because this world is not going to help you there. The thing to conform is going to say, oh, don't worry about it. It doesn't matter. But how you can do that in a way that you love the world and you're not of it, the challenge. Go ahead.
Interesting. It seems like, to me anyway, that you need to speak up with the things that you know about and the people you're involved with. And that could, I guess, be really broad or really narrow. And, you know, if you're not involved with a lot of people, but that seems to be, if you try to go outside of your bounds, there seems to be a lot of trouble.
You know, here's the thing I've thought, because certainly there are people that God anoints to be evangelists, and even, you know, we have people in our own group that are evangelists. And an evangelist is necessarily a person that goes out and speaks to the lost. The way it was. For most of us, we shouldn't be saying anything to anyone that we have not created an environment where what we say has any impact. If you just go up to somebody you don't know and berate them or reprove them, what are they going to think? You're nuts. And instead of bringing them to something, that's another example to them of some damaging person.
One real quick thing. I mean, this same person who I said is really mixed up. Her son got a little LDS girl pregnant, and her parents kicked her out of the house. And so she's living in her house. And she's taking her through the whole pregnancy. Yeah. Her son got an LDS girl.
So in other words,
the girl's parents kicked her out.
So I get what you're saying.
And she took her in.
She's taking care of.
She's taking care of her, paying for everything, all expenses of living there, trying to deal with things, and got her son to marry the girl. And
I mean, you think about it, it's not even hard to figure out who did the right thing.
So it's just a strange. That's why I say it's so hard, and I think you have to stay within your boundaries. God puts you in those boundaries. If you go outside of those, there's a lot of trouble.
Kai, I think you had your hand up, and I need to.
I'm just going to read real quick that passage you mentioned, because I think it shows how Jesus came and brought that absolute righteousness and justice, and yet with the compassion. Here is my servant whom I uphold.
Oh, yeah.
My chosen one in whom I delight.
I love this.
I will put my spirit on him, and he will bring justice to the nations. He will not shout or cry out or raise his voice in the street. A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. In faithfulness he will bring forth justice. He will not falter or be discouraged till he establishes justice on earth. In his law the islands will put their hope. This is what God the Lord says. You created the heavens and stretched them out. You spread out the earth and all that comes out of it. Who gives breath to its people and life to those who walk on it. I, the Lord, have called you in righteousness. I will take hold of your hand. I will keep you and will make you to be a covenant for the people and a light for the nations. To open eyes that are blind, to free captives from prison, and to release from the dungeon those who sit in darkness. I am the Lord, that is my name.
Yeah, so I think that's wonderful. Isaiah 42.